Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something absolutely fascinating. We are going to look at the anatomy of a spiritual turnaround, found in a remarkably brief but incredibly dense piece of text. We're talking just 6 short verses. And in those 6 verses, we're going to trace this profound psychological and spiritual journey that goes from absolute, crushing despair all the way to triumphant joy. So, let's dive right in with this opening question. How long, O Lord? This immediately plunges us into the raw emotion of the text. There's no polite introduction here, no gentle warm-up. This is a visceral, desperate cry. You can practically feel the agonizing exhaustion in these words.
And man, the intensity only escalates with the very next breath. Will you forget me forever? Right out of the gate, the speaker is experiencing these overwhelming feelings of complete abandonment and isolation. This isn't just some fleeting moment of doubt. The speaker is wrestling with the terrifying thought that they have been permanently erased from the divine memory.
To give you a sense of what we're looking at, here's our source material in its entirety from the English Standard Version. It's Psalm 13, explicitly noted as a Psalm of David, and it is astonishingly short, literally just 6 verses. Yet, as you'll see, an incredibly profound psychological shift is captured within these few lines.
To really unpack how this transformation happens, we're going to use a simple 3-act structure. First, the laments in verses 1 and 2. Second, the petition in verses 3 and 4. And third, the praise in verses 5 and 6.
All right, Act 1, the lament.
This first act is just defined entirely by overwhelming sorrow. It says, "How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day?" Notice the agonizing repetition here. If you count the first verse, the phrase, "how long," occurs 4 times. That repetition isn't an accident. It perfectly simulates the sheer exhaustion of an endless, painful wait. And that phrase, "taking counsel in my soul," that essentially means being stuck in your own head, just spiraling through sorrow all day long. But it's not just an internal crisis. Verse 2 finishes with this, "How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" This brilliantly illustrates how external pressure is compounding all that internal sorrow. They aren't just sad, there's a tangible looming threat of a victorious enemy standing right over them. So the pressure is literally crushing from both the inside and the outside. Which brings us to Act 2, the petition.
This is where the text really shifts gears. The speaker's tone fundamentally changes from just passively asking, "how long?" to actively demanding an intervention. Look at these direct, desperate pleas. "Consider and answer me. Light up my eyes." The speaker is begging for vitality, for a spark of life, because without it, they're terrified they will, quote, "sleep the sleep of death." That passive waiting we saw in Act 1, it's completely gone, replaced by a desperate fight for survival.
And the stakes are established right here in verse 4. What actually happens if there's no answer? Well, the speaker faces not just their own death, but the joyous triumph of their foes. The enemy is going to say, "I have prevailed." The stakes literally could not be higher. The tension has been cranked to the absolute maximum. And then we hit this. One single word. But. This word, sitting right at the beginning of verse 5, is the massive psychological hinge of the entire piece. It stops that downward spiral dead in its tracks.
And that kicks off Act 3, the praise.
That word "but" introduces this sudden, powerful pivot to resolution. We enter a totally new emotional landscape. Verse 5 says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." Despite the absolute agony of Act 1 and the life or death stakes of Act 2, the speaker actively makes a choice. They choose to trust in steadfast love. They're entirely abandoning the despair that gripped them just moments ago, and they're anchoring themselves instead in an active, cognitive trust.
And it all culminates in this triumphant conclusion in verse 6. "I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me." Think about that. From fearing the sleep of death to literally singing out loud, the speaker moves to a posture of praise because they recognize they have been dealt with abundantly.
Check out this direct contrast. In verse 2, we add "sorrow in my heart." But now in verse 5, it's "my heart shall rejoice." The exact same place, the heart, that was filled with all-day sorrow, is now the wellspring of rejoicing.
And finally, compare the fear from earlier, that the enemy be exalted, with the new reality, dealt bountifully. What's absolutely crucial to take away from this is that the text gives zero indication that the external circumstances actually changed. I mean, the enemy didn't just vanish between verse 4 and verse 5, but the speaker's perspective has entirely shifted. They went from feeling hunted to feeling abundantly blessed, purely through this internal spiritual process.
So, what does this all mean for us? What does this 6-verse shift teach us about the power of processing our own despair? Well, it challenges us to reflect on the idea that moving honestly through raw lament and desperate petition might actually be the required path to unlock a powerful choice of trust. Could it be that refusing to hide our darkest fears is the very thing that eventually allows us to sing? It's definitely something to think about.